Very excited to welcome Scott Reisfield today. His new book, Greta Garbo and the Rise of the Modern Woman. We're going to talk about it. And welcome, Scott.
It's great to be here, John.
I'm going to just go on a personal aside. I've struggled with Garbo my whole life. I can't quite find it. I know that she was name checked in the Great Sunset Boulevard by Norma Desmond, saying that one Garbo, I think she's got it. And I'm hoping after we talk today, I'll the floodgates will open up and I'll understand. Just want to start out with a couple of questions. I got a few questions here and we'll see where it goes, but I'd like to just let you do as much talking as you see fit. Your central argument is that Greta Garbo helped create the image of the modern woman. When did you first realize this wasn't simply a biography, but a completely different way of interpreting her life?
To be honest, as I was researching it during COVID, I thought I would write a more standard Hollywood biography because I knew there were a lot of mistakes in the way the story had been told. But as I did the research, I realized that what mattered was her impact, that people really hadn't focused on that. And it was pretty amazing.
Okay. And you also have a family connection to her as well, correct?
Yeah. She was my great aunt. And so I had actually never read a biography until after she passed away because I didn't think I needed to, in a way.
Right.
But there were other people writing biographies. And, my mom was like, well, none of these have really captured her. They don't do things right. So I was aware of that issue. But to be honest, it seemed like a rather daunting project. I had a career. I did write an essay for a coffee table book with a museum exhibit of her photographs. That was back in 2005. So it's not like I hadn't done any research, because I did some research for that, but it was very focused on photography. And I picked up some other things along the way, but enough to know that there was some kind of story there that was new. So COVID arrived. I closed my business because it was not COVID resilient. I had just started a business, and I started doing this research, and it just seemed to me that what got lost in the 50s and 60s and 70s was any understanding of why she'd been so important. And then sort of a step beyond that is there's a very specific reason she had the impact she had, and no one really talked about it.
Okay. Well, that goes right into this. You argue that the qualities have often been misunderstood. Her qualities have been often misunderstood. What do you think most biographers have gotten wrong?
Well, I think the first thing is her agency. A lot of the people who started writing about her, like in the 50s, or even later, men writing about her, sort of had trouble with the idea that there was this woman who had a plan and executed it, right? And women do that? It turns out they do. That was one thing. And I think the other thing was, because so much of it came from, I guess I'll call it a celebrity focus. Who did you date and where did you vacation? And those things are fun. I understand people want to read about them. But Garbo came to Hollywood with a completely different style of acting than was then in vogue. The old acting was more vaudevillian, very stylized. I think when most people think of silent films, they think of that kind of, performative, not modern acting, right? You're not trying to inhabit the life of the character, or if you do, you're not really quite so good at it. And Garbo came with a very naturalistic style. That's what Sweden did. As a theater actor, they're doing Strindberg and Ibsen. So it's a very different style than what's on, Broadway or what's in Hollywood. And it just resonated with people. in part because there were technical changes. I mean, she arrived at the right time because they had just moved to panachromatic film. So now you get the full range of colors, and it made close-ups work better. You had new lenses that made close-ups work better. So everything was moving in the direction of what she could deliver, which was this ability to just be that person in the role. So the people watching her felt not that they were watching a character on a screen, that they were in the room with her. And, she would even talk about how she had to make up her character's internal life because the directors didn't care. That's 1926. It's a different world. And so she's creating these female characters, and the women of that era love them.
Okay. You kind of touching on that, you devoted a lot of attention to her early life in Sweden. How important were those formative experiences in shaping the woman that Hollywood eventually met?
Oh, I think so, because I think she was, pretty much Swedish her whole life, even though she lived in America for so long. She was a working class woman. She came from a tight-knit family. They supported her. They, I think had sort of a feminist outlook on the world, which in Sweden is not that uncommon at that era, though it was still the 1920s, 19-teens. During World War I, Sweden was blockaded by the Germans and the Allies, so they had no food. I mean, the average person in Stockholm ate less food than the average person in Berlin during World War I. It was that tough. And they were neutral, right? So they just were stuck. So she'd seen deprivation, even though her family was a working class family. And then, she got old enough as a teenager to start working, and she gets this job at a pub, and which is a department store, and she gets her break. She gets cast in an industrial film, and she uses that, and she's young. She's 16 years old to invest in acting lessons so she can become a stage actor. And she gets into Dramaten, which is this great acting school that's part of the Royal Dramatic Academy. It's also called Dramaten, as short name, and gets great training. And I think she always valued that. She valued the people she was with and the way they wanted her to act. And I think she was also Swedish in her in just sort of her view of other people. Like Sweden is there are classes in Sweden, but it's pretty flexible in a sense. I mean, there was no question she came from a working class family, yet she could get to this school which was full of middle class kids. So I think that she benefited a lot from that. And in Sweden, she was used to meeting all sorts of people. First working at a department store, you have all the people who come in that you try to sell stuff to, but then also, she's pretty quickly in the mix with not just other actors, but directors and producers in Sweden, theater people and film people, because they're in the same place. In Sweden, it's a trolley ride between film and theater. In the United States, Broadway and Hollywood are on different coasts.
Okay, well that's pretty interesting. You said, Mauritz Stiller is often credited with discovering her. After your research, how would you describe his true influence on her career and artistic development?
Yeah, well, he was good friends with the director who cast her in that first industrial film. He was good friends with the guy who was the head of the Dramaten school. He probably saw her early on. But when he was casting Josta Berling, which is the film that was kind of her breakthrough, she's a risk because she's not as trained yet. She's just starting. And it's a key role. Her role, Elizabeth, is not a co-star, but it's the key supporting role in the film. And she has to act a certain way. She's in love with Josta, but she can't act on it, right? Because she's married at the time. So she has to sort of do this interesting, yes, I'm attracted, but I'm true to my husband thing effectively, right? It's got to look real. And so Stiller takes the risk and casts her. And so while he's doing this film, he's going, well, she's talented. Wow, she's really talented. At some point he realizes she's as good as it gets. Like, she could be the best actor of her generation. And he starts working with her to make her that. I mean, it's almost selfless in a way, because he would sacrifice quite a bit to help her succeed. And they had a great professional relationship. It turned into a romantic relationship. But Stiller really, I think, was the first person, and she's young at this point, right? She's 18. And he's like, oh, you can do whatever you want in this field. And he sees it at this young age, and he devotes a lot to helping her gain the other tools she needs to succeed. So he's absolutely instrumental. And I think one of the things I learned, a lot of people have said negative things about Stiller. They say he's like a Svengali to her, which first off doesn't understand Svengali because the person doesn't have the talent. Svengali infuses it in the person, and Garbo had the talent. But he's really as good a mentor as you could ever wish for. He's just fantastic in what he does for her. So, yeah, he's central.
Make the case that Garbo's films reflect changing attitudes towards women rather than simply entertaining audiences. Was there one film that best illustrates this argument?
For me, it's Anna Christie, her first sound film. She plays a number of silent roles as well, where she's very independent. But with Anna Christie, she plays a sex worker trying to reform her life, right? So there's no question that she is not a Victorian paragon of virtue. But she falls in love, and it becomes this very believable, imperfect romance, if you will. And she sticks up for herself when her boyfriend and father are aghast that she's been living this life. She lets into him, and really lets it, or especially her dad, have it. This is because in part of the way you were as a parent, and here's why. You didn't support me, and so it's this transition to women being out in society, living, I'll call it imperfect lives, right? The sort of Victorian porcelain doll, even if it never happened in real life, was sort of this, well, this is the way you're supposed to be. And you push out into this much more driven by passions, and maybe you have ideals. I mean, I know you do a lot of film noir. Well, so you're driven by passions and don't have ideals, right? So Garbo is on the other side of that fence. She's driven by passions, but it's the ideals that people resonate with, that she's looking for true love, that she's looking for this interior honesty. And she's always looking for these characters and finding them. And for me, Anna Christie, and it's not like there aren't any earlier, but Anna Christie is like the transformative one because of sound. And people who were critiquing acting at the time thought my favorite comment about her acting in Anna Christie, too many Annas, was, oh, now we find out she's been acting with one arm tied behind her back. right? Because her voice makes all the difference in the world in terms of portraying how the character is feeling, when you hear her say it. So, yeah, that's the one I'm going to go with.
Okay, fantastic. Garbo's relationship with John Gilbert has become part of Hollywood legend. What surprised you most when you examined the historical evidence rather than the mythology?
Well, the nuance of it. They were clearly in love and quite smitten with each other. But they were always aware that they were sort of an odd pair. And there was this great quote by Gilbert in a magazine interview where he said something along the lines of, Garbo wants, if we get married, she wants to retire to a farm and raise children. And I want to be a movie star. Gilbert loved being a movie star and all of the trappings of movie stardom and being out as the movie star. And Garb was kind of a homebody who, just, likes to read, take walks. So at some point they realized they shouldn't get married. It just wasn't going to be that kind of thing. But they always had this attraction for years. And they remained friends. Even, I think Gilbert would get drunk and decide he wanted to marry Garbo. There's some pretty legendary stories around that, but, it didn't happen, and they would go back to making movies, which is kind of the interesting thing. And, so I think that it was, one of those situations, and Stiller's involved in this too, because it is sort of, Garbo's romantic relationship with Stiller was on and off again while she was seeing Gilbert. And, so she, I think, was trying to figure out what she wanted to do romantically. And, Gilbert was part of the equation, but not the answer.
You argue that Garbo challenged social conventions long before modern feminism became a mainstream movement. How conscious do you think she was of the example she was setting?
I think she was pretty conscious of it. It's interesting because people watching her thought they could understand what she was thinking, what her character was thinking as she was acting a role. And in the first film, one of the censors responded to the film, how do you censor thought? Right? You can see the thought. So she's playing these characters, and they're not all like this. Mata Hari's just a spy, right? So it's a little different. But she's playing these characters that there's a component to the character that's socially modern, almost always, and she's looking for these roles. And one of her complaints was that MGM was casting her in uninteresting roles. And she had a contract situation with them that was resolved. She signed a new 5-year deal, and then the roles got interesting. And again, it's not a universal thing, but something like The Single Standard is she's a very independent woman.
For just being the typical of the time. One of the great strengths of your book was that you placed Garbo in a broader social context of the 20s and 30s. Did your research change the way you think about that entire time period of history?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of understanding how the social environment evolved, and the Depression really did change things, made it a much more conservative country, the rising tide of fascism and how Americans felt about it. So it's interesting how Garbo fits into that time period, in the sense that I think you see her being very independent, and then she gets to Queen Christina in 1933, and she's playing a queen. And the social conservatives were incensed, not just because of the sex implied in the film. It's all basically implied other than kissing. But they're incensed with her portrayal of a queen. She's not fitting into the norms they want in terms of authority. She's doing things the way she would as a modern female queen do them. So there are these elements up through there. And then you have this transition in 1933 to the Production Code Administration, which really kind of takes, it's not an instantaneous effect. So it's more like 1934 that you start to see it sink its teeth into the system of production. But, they wanted a more conservative portrayal of women in film. And no communism and, no worker riots and then, social control kind of things. But a lot of it was they wanted the way women were portrayed to be more traditional. And Garbo's response was a set of costume dramas where they totally subvert the code by making her pay whatever social price for her transgressions. Because nobody watching the movies believed that she was paying a price she wouldn't pay because she was being true to her heart. And so it's hard, maybe sometimes. That's one of the things that changed for me. I really looked at those three films in a new context, understanding that her portrayals were driven by the code and their need to subvert it to deliver their message. So when you watch those films today, it's hard to understand the richness of the role in its era, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Okay.
So one of the things, for instance, Anna Karenina, because she's an adulteress, nobody is supposed to approve of her in society. So you get this incredible condemnation by everybody in the film that she rises above. Well, it just seems in some ways a bit much, when you watch it today, right? But it's in the times that it's using that to overcome the production code. People think Anna's paid a price by being condemned and then dying. And the audience is going, well, she was true to her heart. I love her. So that's the dichotomy.
That's pretty bold standing up to the Hays Code. But I was totally unaware of that. So when I have Anna Karenina in my queue to watch, and so now I'll be able to watch it with a little more understanding. You just knocked out my next question because I was going to ask you about the production code, but you already covered all that, so great. Garbo retired while still at the height of her fame. Do you see this decision as a personal withdrawal, a business decision, a final expression of independence you've described throughout the book?
Oh, I will do that, but let me go back to the production code.
Okay.
That's fascinating. So she makes these costume dramas, then she makes Ninotchka, which is a comedy and very anti-communist. It's a very political movie, but it really holds up till today. It's great. When you have Billy Wilder writing the script, you're starting from a good place. But then she makes Two-Faced Woman, which is her last film. And people write about it like it was a failure, and that it was condemned. It was condemned by the Legion of Decency. But the story of why it was condemned is the key piece. So Joe Breen had just resigned from running the Production Code Administration. Okay. And the social conservative network that was sort of behind all this wanted to make sure that Gene Sherlock would take a tougher line. Breen was socially conservative, but he realized that movies had to tell a story or nobody would go. So he would negotiate. So they wanted a much tougher regime. And Two-Faced Woman was not a particularly bawdy movie. It wasn't any racy, literally movies that had been released 2 or 3 months before. One with almost the same plot, Chocolate Soldier. But they picked Two-Faced Woman to attack. And I don't know if it was because of Garbo. In part, it certainly didn't hurt them. And it was a different kind of role for Garbo. It was a comedy, trying to follow up on Ninotchka. And it was successful. They got MGM to pull the film. We don't watch the film that was released today. We watch the edited version that has the story-destroying edits that were insisted upon. The original film actually won awards. It didn't make a lot of money because the weekend after it was released was Pearl Harbor, which cut into not Pearl Harbor weekend, but the following weekend, nobody went to the theater. So all the movies that got released there, for Thanksgiving or maybe at the beginning of December, just suffered horribly at the box office, and so did Two-Faced Woman. And it wasn't going to have the same kind of export business because of the war. So it may not have been the greatest Garbo film ever, but it wasn't horrible. And people think, turning to the question you then asked, right? So the production code, the social conservatives have won. And this triumph would run through the 60s. It all comes from the Two-Faced Woman condemnation and the reaction to it. They are now firmly in charge. And Garbo's problem was, I think in part she was Garbo, but that she wanted to do these interesting roles for the most part, and they weren't going to approve those scripts. So I found a string of projects that she signed to do. So right after Two-Faced Woman, which was 1941, she signed with MGM to do The Girl from Leningrad in 1942. And it was canceled after Bernie Hyman, who was the producer, passed away. He had a heart attack and died. And Louis B. Mayer went to Garbo and said, I'm going to cancel this film. It's about a Russian nurse during the Winter War against Finland. So she's again playing this leadership in a romance kind of thing, like Ninotchka without the comedy. I never have seen a script of what they were going to do. But so MGM canceled the project. They had already paid her in advance. Mayer actually offered to pay her the balance, and she turned him down. She said, I'm not doing the film. I don't need to get paid. And then there's a string of roles that she considered during the war. St. Joan, but George Bernard Shaw didn't want an experienced actor in the role of Joan. The one I really wish would have been made. Both George Cukor and Katharine Hepburn relate, the three of them sitting with Louis B. Mayer pitching Morning Becomes Electra and getting turned down. That would have been an interesting film. And there are a number of other projects. It does, especially towards, she looked at she signed to do a film called Women of the Sea that she then backed out of because she didn't like the script. And then after the war, there's a whole bunch of projects that people attached to her. And in some cases, it's hard to know how serious they were or if it was just PR to get interest in the film. But she, after the war, agreed to do a movie about George Sand, who was a cross-dressing lesbian writer. So this is her response to the Lavender Scare. She signs to do George Sand. So yes, she could be political, but she did it sort of in her choices. That movie got transformed into a film called Duchess de Langeais. And they sent a script into the Production Code Administration and were told in no uncertain terms that it was not acceptable. So that killed that project, basically. There's a little more to killing the project. It drags on, but they never had a script. Though I think, and I'll say this, is that Hollywood was changing, so she really benefited from being part of the MGM system. Thalberg, took care of her, knew what her market was, these independent female middle-class clerks, and he delivered that audience these films with Garbo and other people, Norma Sherrod, Joan Crawford, and whatnot. But Garbo was the key to it in terms of the dollars. And that was gone. And so, you end up with Walter Wanger lying to everybody as he's trying to get Duchess de Langeais through the system about, whether he's got a script, whether he's got financing, all these things. He's just dancing as fast as he can until it falls apart. But even after that, so in 1955, the last film that I found, or film project, because it never got made, that I found Garbo signed to do was in 1955. So she spent almost as many years trying to make a film after her last film as she spent making films at MGM. Yeah. She was going to make The Miracle, which was an old Max Reinhardt play, very religious. And they were going to make it originally I call it a film, but it was originally going to be a TV special to be run every Easter. And, it got transformed as a concept instead of being just this spare, simple project. So one of the two people who they considered as the writer of the screenplay was Samuel Beckett. And that's all you have to know where they were shooting for in terms of the way this film was going to work. It was going to be, very intelligent and philosophical, and it got transformed into a CinemaScope spectacular. And Garbo's response was, "That's not what I'm going to do." George Schley, who was her late in life lover and advisor on this, because he did have a theatrical background. He said in a letter back to Norman Bel Geddes, who was the producer, "I don't see how this can't be schmaltzy. You have battles with cannons, and it's not going to be the same kind of story as we had originally considered." So that's the last project I found a contract for. I know people pitched her after that, and I know that she may have considered something at some level, but I don't know. I don't have any commitment. But I do have, Tennessee Williams pitched her on a play, The Pajama Game, as a film. And it's a story about lust, not love. So Williams said, Garbo's response was, "It's great, but it's not for me. Give it to Joan Crawford," right? And she was right. It's a Joan Crawford role. It's not a Garbo role. But the Garbo role, and now she's older, it makes it even harder to find the right Garbo role, is a romance, at the heart of it. And so, but of an imperfect woman, often. So that's the role that you just don't see being filmed in the 50s, 60s. It's not till the 70s when all of a sudden, there's this new challenging kind of film. But in 1970, she's 60 years old.
Time gone by. Wow. Let's see. If modern audiences knew only one or two Garbo films, what would be the two or three that you would recommend to someone to fully understand her?
Well, I think Ninotchka is the most accessible. It's a comedy, but the jokes still land today. She's a Soviet commissar who comes to Paris to retrieve the diamonds that were stolen, and she falls in love. And the guy who came up with the basic idea, his 3-sentence pitch was something like, Russian commissar comes to Paris, falls in love, capitalism not so bad after all, and that's basically the movie. But it's fun. It's a fun movie, and it's very crisp, and it's well acted in all the roles, really. And I would say after that, I mean, Camille is the best of the costume dramas. It's a spectacular film. Her acting is so good. And it's a little creaky because it is a little dated, but it's just such a great film as an older film. Mick LaSalle, who's a film writer, thinks everybody should watch it multiple times. He says you can't watch it just once. You got to see it several times because you just don't catch all the little things in one viewing, which may be more than most people will sign up for. But it is a great film, and she's spectacular. The nuance she delivers is amazing.
Okay, you're trying to tell me that most people don't watch films 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a row?
Well, not in a row. I mean, it's interesting because their films all come back to every couple of years, just because they do something for me, and some of them are classics, and some of them aren't.
No, it's just being funny because I watch movies, every few years. I'll watch it again. I haven't watched Dog 17. I got to watch that again. Pull it back in. That's okay.
Well, it's funny too to see a movie you haven't watched in a while, and it does strike you in a different way. I saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind a couple of months ago. I hadn't seen it, basically since it came out, and it just struck me different. It was interesting.
That is interesting. I get because I guess you have your time where you're at when you watch it, and it has its story, and then you're at a different place and it has the story, but you interpret it different as life goes by. That's good. Okay, let's see. Researching a figure as famous as Garbo means sorting facts from legend. What long-held myth proved to be the most difficult to unravel or dismiss?
Oh, most difficult? I'm going to go with most interesting because I think it's a fun story. So Garbo came to New York in July 1925 and spent 2 months there. And people have written that MGM didn't know what to do with her, and they really wanted Stiller, and they were trying to maybe even send her back to Sweden. And that's a very common take on Garbo's arrival in the United States. That's not what happened at all. She came, she had a letter of intent for a 5-year deal, and she didn't want a 5-year deal. She wanted a 1-year deal. And the problem with her letter of intent was she was only 19, so it wasn't legally enforceable. So she spent 2 months negotiating what ended up being a 3-year deal. So the reason she spent all this time in New York wasn't because MGM didn't want her. They desperately wanted her. So much so they would sign a 3-year deal, which they almost instantly regretted. They really didn't like the fact that they only had her for 3 years. They would threaten her with bad roles if she didn't sign a 5-year deal after she'd been there for a year and a half, which led to her walking out of the studio. They cast her in a film it ended up being called Women Love Diamonds. And she refused because it was a crappy film. And she had been promised quality roles. And MGM said, well, only if you sign a 5-year deal. And then they spent 4 months discussing that. And then she signed a 5-year deal, but she got the money and she got the roles after that.
Pretty amazing for someone that young to be that secure in themselves that they could negotiate like.
Well, yeah. And she had, help. She hired a lawyer, in America. She had Stiller, who was still there in New York. He had his own separate contract issue but his was a little more straightforward. But yeah, she was pretty self-assured, and I think that was the thing, because she was happy with the idea of being a stage actress in Stockholm. Everything else was kind of extra. I do think once she got to Hollywood, because when she was in New York, she was like, I'd like a 1-year deal, right? I'm going to see what it's like. They're like, no, 5. So 3 is the compromise. But I think that once she got to Hollywood, she realized that it wasn't like making movies in Europe, and that the impact of the assets Hollywood could bring to a project were just unmatched. And that's the thing. She wanted to have impact. So if you want to have impact, you make movies in Hollywood. She had plenty of opportunity after her, so she signs a 3-year deal and goes to Hollywood and learns. So she could have, at any point after that, made movies anywhere in the world. People would have thrown money at her. And she made movies in Hollywood because that's where you went to make impact. So she wanted the impact. Oddly enough, without the celebrity if possible. But the impact on the audience is something she did.
Okay. Well, that kind of probably segues into this next part. Just what did you discover during your research that you think this changes how we should understand Garbo?
Well, I think the idea, they're sort of interrelated, that she had a lot of agency, that she wanted to do these things, that she was aware she was having this impact on her fan base and kept doing it. And that given the opportunity to not make movies in Hollywood, she kept making movies in Hollywood. And I think that she wasn't unaware of her celebrity, and I think she knew where it came from. It came from the audience, and it was in some ways overwhelming. I think maybe that's one of the things I learned, was how overwhelming her celebrity was for the era. So one of the things I did was I wanted to understand, I was trying to find, how do you find the 1930s equivalent of a Q score, right? So
yeah.
I went back to Photoplay magazine, which was the main film fan magazine of the era. There were several, but that was sort of the lead magazine. And I just counted up how often various actors, female actors, were mentioned in Photoplay each year. So basically, if you got mentioned 100 times, you were a star, a sizable star. If you got mentioned 300 times, you were either Greta Garbo or Joan Crawford. If you got mentioned 700 times, you were Greta Garbo. But the scale of that, right? You're a star at 100, and 1 year, Garbo's over 700. I mean, there was a fan magazine that apologized one month for not running a Garbo article in a prior issue. It was that kind of focus on her. She received almost 1 million letters a year. Right? You could not answer as an individual 1 million letters a year.
No.
It'd probably take a staff of about 30
right.
to send everybody a photo and whatever. So, Eleanor Roosevelt used to receive 300,000 letters a year when she was First Lady. So that's the scope of Garbo's impact on the people who watched her. They had, they didn't have the internet, then there was no Instagram. So the way you responded to these heroes of yours was you wrote them letters, or you bought their photos, or you read about them in Photoplay. And, I think it could be pretty intimidating for the average person, because the negative is, and Garbo did have this, you get stalkers. I mean, she had stalked in the 30s. And, so I think, but I think that while she didn't like the celebrity part of it, she couldn't really walk away from the actor having an impact part of it. Because that's why people act, to have an impact and to tell a story. And her stories happen to be about modern women. So who loved her was the women trying to learn how to be modern. And she, dragged them out of the Victorian era, not by herself. I mean, I'm very clear on the fact that, other actors were doing the same thing. The Norma Shears and Joan Crawfords and Katharine Hepburn. Mm-hmm. They just didn't have the same impact in terms of engagement by anything you can measure. And they're making more movies than she's making. After she signed her first independent deal, she made 7 movies in 9 years. She's dealing with pernicious anemia, which I didn't even know until I started researching her. So it really restricted how much effort she could put into each project. And she made fewer movies than almost anybody major, because she was making, basically under her initial MGM contracts, 3 films a year, and everybody else is making 4. And then as she gets into the mid to late 30s, she's just scaling back even more. But the studio's investing in these productions. They're on 2-year pre-production timelines, which is just amazing for the 30s.
After someone's finished reading your book and they want to remember one idea about Greta Garbo, what do you hope that idea is, and why does it still matter today?
Well, I think it's that she's one of the women, and there's several of them, like the Amelia Earharts, other actors who helped women show the world that women could do a lot of things in the world that in a generation earlier they were precluded from doing. It was a much more restricted female life. In the 19th century, it was a separate sphere of life. They had the home and hearth, and the guys had the city. And it maybe back in the pre-industrial days, it made sense because laundry day used to take all day. Now you just kick it into the washing machine. Come back after an hour or so, check on it. So the world opened up for women, and they, how do you take advantage of it? And I think the message I want people to understand is not by herself, and it wasn't just in film, because there are other people in other avenues doing this, but she's one of the women who in the first half of the 20th century sort of showed women that they could be modern women.
Okay. Scott, that's absolutely fascinating. Is there anything that I've forgotten to ask you that you would like to just say? Any last message?
Well, I think, it's not unrelated from times today. The role of women in society is once again a focus culturally. There's some conservative blowback about, what women should or shouldn't do. Should they even be out working, or should they be home, tending the hearth? And so this is a story that relates to today rather directly. It's also history, but I think it relates to today, and so I think it's interesting. And for people who like to read things like Hidden Figures or The Woman of No Importance, this is right in that same vein as a story about women in an era of change.
Fantastic. Scott, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here, and we'll put some links in the description to show where you can get this great book. I highly recommend it. I think you're going to like it. And thank you again, Scott.
Well, John, this has been great. I did, look at some of the other YouTubes that you've done, and it's like, I have to go back and rewatch a bunch of noir films now, because I've been looking at your YouTubes. So thanks.
Well, thank you very much. All right.